Good morning again. Our scripture this morning is from James chapter 2, verses 14 through 24. What good is it, my brothers, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can that faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what good is that? So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. Even the demons believe and shudder. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from work is useless? Was not Abraham our father justified by works when he offered up his son Isaac on the altar? You see that faith was active along with his works, and faith was completed by his works. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed in God, and it was counted to him as righteousness, and he was called a friend of God. You see that a person is justified by works and not by faith alone. May God add his blessing to the reading of his word.
Thank you, Carly. I would begin this morning and preface by telling you that Josh called me and asked me, "Wally, would you preach for me the coming Sunday morning?" And I said, "Well, sure I would, but I don't preach." So I have a message that I would like to share with you. I'm certainly not an ecclesiastical person such as Josh or our brother Mike back there. So please know that it's a message, and it's always something that kind of touches my heart, and I feel as if I like to share it with everyone. I've entitled my message this morning, 10 Things That God Won't Ask You. Now, I'm sure that you've sat at home many times in front of the television, or maybe when you were driving in your automobile, or who knows, lying in bed, and you've asked yourself, I wonder what Jesus is going to ask me someday. Did you ever think what he won't ask you? Well, I'm going to ask you to think along with me along these lines this morning and see if we can agree on a few of these, some of them, maybe all of them. Well, first of all, I don't think God is going to care what kind of car you drove or you're driving. Today, we have all sorts of models. They change, seems like every year, from economy to midsize, SUVs, motorhomes, leather interiors, cloth interiors, unbelievable dashboards, ones that tell you the directions, ones that may even sing to you. Some of them probably might tell you at times when you need to blow your nose. I don't know. Maybe they do that. They have heated seats, and they have steering wheels that are heated. Let me share you one about my wife. The last time she bought an automobile, she got ready to buy it, and she said to the salesman, she said, she said, "I need to make sure that the steering wheel is heated and that the seats are heated up front." He said, I don't have it. He says, "But Donna, give me a few minutes or an hour or so, and I'll get back to you." Well, it wasn't probably 15, 20 minutes. He calls back, "Guess what? I've got it." Donna said, "Sold." Well, not only when she got the car did she find out she had her heated steering wheel and she had her heated front seats, but the seats in the back were also heated. So those are the kind of things that we get. So I don't think he cares what you drove, but he might ask how many people you drove who had no transportation to a number of things in their life. To shopping, to see relatives, to come to church, to see friends or something. He might ask you that question. Number 2, I don't think God will ask you the square footage of your home. Now, we've got them all today. Trailers, side-by-sides, single to multiple bedrooms, one bath, even one bath for each person in the house, sometimes a special bath for just the pet to be cleaned, washed, and so on and so forth. Homes that have just about anything you want. We don't care. He won't care about your footage. He will not care. But he might ask you how many people you welcomed into that home. He might ask you that question. That weren't relatives, family, neighbors. He might ask you that. Number 3, I don't believe God will ask about the fancy clothes you had in your closet or have there. Whether you got them from Goodwill, you got them from the Salvation Army, you got them from Mercy Unlimited, you got them for garage sales, you got them from hand-me-downs from generation to generations, all the way to the most expensive designer clothes that money can buy. I can remember before we came to Wapakoneta, we had a special recognition night for individuals we wanted to honor my wife wanted to honor via community health professionals, and we chose an individual in town. And he had passed away, but my wife got on the telephone and invited he and his wife to this recognition dinner that we were having on behalf of his father. Well, he said, "I'm sorry, Donna. We're going to be flying to London on a shopping trip." Now, I don't mean to step on any toes, so maybe some of you do that. But I don't think Don and I thought about taking too many trips to London for a shopping trip for clothes. But they were going to take one over there to buy clothes. He might ask you, how many of those clothes helped someone who was needy? You know, I'm reminded of another situation where one time we had some mission people who came to our church, and we ended up having about 12, 14 people in our home. And the guy who was running, the guy kind of looked a little on the shabby side with respect to his clothes, not being critical, that's the way it is. And he came in and we sat there a few minutes, and he looked over at me and he said, "Wally, I really like that sweater you're wearing." And I said, "Do you really?" He said, "Yeah, I do." We went on with the presentation, broke for lunch, had that, came back, had an afternoon session, and so on and so forth. We got ready to leave. And he said, "Just a second." I said to him, "Just a second." I took off the sweater and I handed it to him. You can't believe how happy that man was. Now, I don't tell you that so that Wally Grimm gets a pat on his back. That's not the point. But it was a feel-good moment. It was more of a feel-good moment for him. That certainly meant something to him. It was really great. I can remember another instance when I was either in the 7th or the 8th grade. We called it junior high school in Tiffin. And I was the son of a Methodist minister, my dad. And one Christmas day, the doorbell rang. Dad went to the door, and I followed him up as any 7th or 8th grader may to see who it is on Christmas, who was going to mess our Christmas up. There was kind of a really shabby-looking guy standing there, and he looked at my dad, and he said, "Reverend Grimm," he said, "the police told me that you probably could help me out a little bit." My dad said, "Well, I probably can. Why don't you come on in?" So he came in, and the first thing my dad says, because he had on just a little skimpy jacket, my dad walked over under the Christmas tree and pulled up this brand new overcoat that my mother had given him. Walked over and told the guy to turn around. My dad put it on him, and he said, "Boy, that looks great on you." My dad, because he was a pastor, had a discretionary fund with some, as most of the churches do. My dad gave him some money to get some food, got him a motel room, and the guy took off, and that was it. I don't want to tell you what my mother shared with my dad once the door closed. My dad turned to her, and my mother's name was Maxine, and he called her Mac all the time. He turned, he said, "Mac, I don't need that nearly as much as that guy needed that coat." So I don't think he'll be concerned about that. He'll want to know what you did for the needy. Number 4, I don't believe God will ask you about your social status in life, whether or not you're invited to the biggest, the greatest, most unbelievable parties in the community with the biggest names and the highest social climbers in the community around, or whether or not you had a social or a civic position with a particular group. I don't think he cares. I don't think he will care. But he might ask you what kind of class you displayed at those gatherings and those memberships. Think about it. Fifthly, I don't think God will ask how many material possessions you had in life. How many cars you owned, how many condos, how many houses, how many adult toys you had, how many stocks, how many bonds, how many mutual funds, how many expensive collectibles you have sitting around. Now, who you tried to impress with those things. Think about it. Think about if you ever bought them for those reasons. Well, you'll probably ask if they dictated your life. Two other quick stories. I had an uncle in West Virginia who was a barber who worked, I'm telling you, probably his entire life, every day he could barber, he barbered. I don't remember him ever taking a single day of vacation. He served on a couple of banks. He did. He had quite a bit of money when he passed. Oh, what shall it profit you? And he did that. I don't know whether he stopped to see if it dictated his life, but we discussed how it probably dictated his. Tell you about another uncle. When Don and I were married, we went to Naples, Florida, and there lived an uncle of mine, and I'm here to tell you also, and she'll attest to this, that he was a multimillionaire. He got it all from real estate way back when he sold golf courses, he sold high rises, he sold land. I know for a fact that he sold the land that was sold to the United States Post Office in downtown Naples. He owned it. I know the land where the Ritz-Carlton sits. He owned that. He sold that. He sold a lot of things like that. He made unbelievable tons of money. Never gave me any, but he made a lot of money. One day he said to Don and I, hey, come on, why don't you go with me? I'm going out to get some tomatoes. We drove outside of Naples. He had 3 or 4 big buckets in the back of his Lincoln Town Car. When we got there, all of us picked and filled those up. We had like 4 buckets in the back of that town car. And then he had a small bucket about yay big and about that big around. And he filled that up and he sat it between he and his wife in the front seat. And when we got up towards the front where we were checking out, he said, now don't say a word. We got up there, they said, is that what you've got? He said, yes. I don't know, it was maybe 50 cents or $1 for all those tomatoes in that one little pail. Probably 50 cents. We drove away. A little bit of an understanding as to why and how I understood he got all that he had. It dictated his life. My wife can tell you, money dictated his life. Number 6, I don't think God's going to ask you about what your highest salary was. What a driving force that is for some people. Let me get that particular high salary so I can move on, so I can step along. If I want to get another job or something, I can tell them how much I make. Or on the ladder of things where I work right now, I'm here. I want to get there if I'm not there. To some people, it controls their every being to be first. Well, but God may ask you if you compromised your character to get it. Big difference. Number 7, I don't think God will ask you how much overtime you worked. Do you imagine him keeping track of something like that? Of course, he's track of anything. He'd do anything. I used to work for a superintendent who, to my knowledge, never ever took a day off. He worked the entire summer. He worked every day of school. If we had a horrendous day and we canceled school, he was there. Unbelievable. I used to say to him, you need to take some time off. You really need to do it. Refresh yourself. I don't think God cares. I don't think society cared. I don't think the Board of Education cared that he did that. Some people do that to avoid the realities in life. But I believe that he'll ask you if you worked overtime for your family and for loved ones. Overtime for that. 8, I don't think God will ask you how many promotions you received in life. Did you ever notice in the newspaper the notings of promotions with respect to education and business? Proclamations and advancements, all sorts of reasons. I see them in the Lima News. I've seen them in the Wapakoneta Daily News. People in education who jumped into a supervisory capacity from an assistant this to an assistant that, up from assistant to full-time principalship, business from assistant cashier to head cashier to vice president of a bank, promotions, all sorts of promotions for all sorts of reasons. Now, I'm not saying that those things aren't important, because they certainly are. But he probably will ask if you performed your job to the best of your ability. And finally, I skipped a space, excuse me, lost one. I don't think God's going to ask you what your job title was. Think of where that could take you. Probably meant more to you than anybody else in the world. Not your co-workers or people, they could care less. But it meant something to you, the title that you had. You know, even Shakespeare said, what's in a name? You know? But he's probably going to ask you if you performed that job well. And finally, I don't think God will ask you what you did to help yourself. Did you step on someone else to get ahead? Did you lie? Did you mislead others to get there? Did you hurt someone along the way to get there? And I'm sure as we think back, if we've ended careers or if we're still in them, if we just stop long enough and think about that, that's a pretty awesome question to answer. And somewhere or another, I would guess it's probably happened to slide in there somewhere along the way. God won't ask if you what you did to help yourself. But he will ask what you did to help others. Wow, big difference. Big difference. It doesn't play into your arena, doesn't play into your pocketbook, doesn't play into your acceptance, what you did to help others. In all 10 cases, I really don't think God cares one iota about any of those things. I don't think he's keeping track of it. I don't think he's chalking it up, whether you own them or you did them. They're not important, and they are passing fancies. They may be total passing fancies, and if you're in that arena today, they still are passing fancies. Well, how'd you do? How'd you do on those 10? I ask you to think about these and other questions that you might have and wonder whether he'll ask you, or what he'll ask you, or what he won't ask you. Now let's keep plugging along this morning and every day, if you will, recalling what the psalmist said, I desire to do your will, my God. Your law is within my heart. Thank you.
Majesty, worship his majesty.